I have 6:32, so why don't we plan to go ahead and come to order, and I'm sure Scott will be along in short order. But I'll get some of the housekeeping out of the way. This is the January 13th Fiber Broadband Completion Task Force meeting being held virtually on Zoom under the rules enacted by the state of Massachusetts for COVID. And I'm the chairperson, Mark Howell, and I'll just do a quick roll call. Gordon Brockway.
Here.
Scott Hopkinson is not here at the moment. David Hessel.
Here.
Gail Heyer.
Here.
Okay, so we'll come to order, and we do not have minutes distributed yet for last week's meeting. I was in communication with Scott, and he said he wanted to give him another once over before he sent them out. So that'll be fine. As far as upcoming meetings, we are not scheduled to meet next Thursday, as I've mentioned multiple times before, because of the special town meeting for the middle school is taking place at the same time that we would normally meet. So at this stage of the game, our next scheduled meeting is going to be on Thursday, January 27th. And so would one of you care to volunteer to clerk for tonight?
You know, I'll do the next meeting. I don't want to do today's because I had some medical stuff done that I'm nervous about being, I mean, I'm alert enough to participate, but taking notes might not be the best idea for me.
Okay.
Tonight.
I'm sorry that I can't do it either. I'm wrapped up in other issues.
You're about to be away for the next couple of meetings.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. So
Puts the pressure on Gordon. I'm sorry to say.
it does. I'm anticipating that tonight's meeting is going to be primarily about discussing these communications that we need to send that have already been distributed. And what I'm going to be looking for primarily is your input and consensus that we're kind of on the right track. I do think it's an opportunity for us to especially consider the communication about to the Board of Selectmen as also a brief update on what our progress is. And to some extent this came about because as I was preparing our statement for the annual town report, it caused me to go back and look for dates because I wanted to be accurate about appointment and when we started. And I noticed at that time that the appointments to this committee that the select board made all expire on February 1st of this year. So that means that, officially, we have 10 more days or whatever it is, 17 more days before those appointments would expire. It seems to me that we're clearly not ready to be completed at this point. So I communicated with Terry Ackerman, who I see is just joining our meeting, about that situation. And her suggestion was, obviously we can communicate about that, and that it would make sense for us to also communicate to the board how we were doing, sort of what we had accomplished to date, and so forth. So the email that I sent to all of you for review earlier today was related to that process. It seemed to me that it would make sense, assuming you all are willing to do this, to request a reappointment for a short duration, something in the vicinity of the end of this fiscal year for the town, or just after town meeting or something along those lines. It would give us the opportunity to finish the work that we've been doing, and plan to hand it off. And if we have recommendations, obviously, for future work. So I noticed Scott has now joined us. Welcome, Scott.
Sorry for the delay.
Oh, no worries. So I was just going over the sort of background on why communicate with the select board at this point. And the primary reason, of course, is that, once our appointments expire, it's not clear to me that we would be authorized to continue working. I feel like we need to continue working and have a path to generating a report on these subjects that could be useful to the town. So the primary elements of that communication were to, sort of alert them to the fact that we're not really ready to be done. That we have, I think, already been able to discover some pertinent facts that are important and suggestive of where things should be going. And I believe that we are beginning to approach some consensus on where to go. So that memo was designed to sort of illuminate those points. And so I appreciate you guys reading it. And I thought that we might just start with a discussion about that topic tonight. So
I apologize for joining late. Is someone else doing minutes or am I doing them?
I think there's a consensus that the committee would appreciate it if you would.
Okay. All right. So I'm assuming the meeting was called to order at some point here.
Yeah.
I've already started the draft of the minutes. I did that earlier this evening.
6:32, and I noted that our minutes from last week's meeting are not yet ready for review.
Yeah, I apologize. I needed to do just one more pass through it, and I've been
no problem. And so I just covered that we will not meet next week. We'll plan to meet on the 27th, and that led me to item 3, the third bullet, which is the committee reappointments, which would be to really permit us to continue working past February 1st.
Okay.
I think it's worth noting here, and I did speak with Gail. Gail was the petitioner, obviously, for Article 41, and I think the language around the deadline for the report that made it into that article was sort of driven by the notion that there might be some proposals for warrant articles that town meeting could act on this year. Clearly, I think we've decided quite a while ago that we didn't think that we would be ready to propose anything that substantive at this point. And so we've been not that focused on the annual town meeting calendar. I don't know, Gail, do you want to make any further comment on that?
Yeah, that's right. And actually the other thing, one of the other reasons that I had put such a short time frame on it was actually related to funding and the ARPA funding that is currently available, and whatever other COVID funding may become available. I knew that was sort of time sensitive, so I wanted people to focus on it, in the near term and not let too much time pass. So, but yes, the length of time was related to town meeting, and with the thought that if something were developed that needed to be proposed, then it needed to be proposed in advance, so people could talk about it. But yeah, I agree with what you said earlier.
Yeah. I think that being said, it's also important that we do take seriously the charge that did suggest that we should move quickly, and there was never any intention for this to become anything like a standing committee that was engaged in long-term work. We do not have a budget to spend on things. And so, and our primary charge is essentially investigatory and advisory. And so I feel strongly that we should bring to conclusion what we can in a timely manner. And by that, I mean by the time the next town meeting convenes, and leave it to the citizens or the recommendations to suggest what should happen next. And my sense is that you all agree with that, but if anybody feels differently about it, this would be a good time to surface that.
So I agree, and what I've captured is that the intention is to move quickly with our primary charge and to provide feedback to the town meeting and not create a standing.
Right. Terry, I might invite you to comment if you would like.
Yes, I have to fix my lighting. 1 second.
Okay, great.
Okay, thank you. I think that's better. So,
Yes.
Sorry I joined late, but yes. If everyone on the committee agrees, we can go forward in that manner, and the select board can discuss this and, vote to extend your charge. I think it would be good. I don't have the memo, Mark, so I'm assuming that you probably outlined what you've accomplished so far and what, where you're going in this.
Yeah, in fact, why don't I pull that up? Just maybe.
Okay.
So this is a version that is contains some edits that I just got back from Gail, but essentially it in the first paragraph it just says essentially how we came about, and that we haven't we've been meeting weekly or almost weekly, and we are making progress. So the idea is that we would, and Gordon, I did see your comment about this sentence, and we can deal with that. I think I characterize it as working
not a big deal.
responsible way, but essentially we don't want to give the work short shrift was all I was trying to imply. Town meeting is in May. I think that we can produce a report that substantially documents the further points in here in time for that, and certainly meet with the light board and the select board and maybe the finance committee or those kinds of groups in the time frame that would allow us to complete the work. Certainly no later than June 30th. Gordon is the representative of the light board, Terry, just for your information. I know that, but his light board term, I believe, expires whenever light board terms expire. So he would be rolling off of that. So we might have a little. I know our charge and suggests that there be a rep for the light board, so there might be a way to handle that too.
All right, because I think that these dates are very ambitious.
I do too, but I also think we should say what we can say and then move on from there.
Right, but we don't want to be in a situation where you come back again for to get another extension. Like, how confident are people that you still have a ways to go? Are you confident with this June 30th date?
Well, we've started drafting, we have an outline of a report, right? So, we're making progress.
Yeah, you're making great progress. You guys are working really hard. But I mean, worst case, you could come back to the select board again.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Sometimes it's good to put in a little slack in case oh, there's a snowstorm, your meeting's canceled, what, things like that.
There's a pandemic.
You guys feel really confident that you can do it, then
Well,
we can go for
I
this date.
actually think at this point, the critical path is individual work for the sections, which will probably take, I know from my viewpoint, it'll probably take another 2 weeks because I'm managing my daily life, my daily work, my 50 or 60 hours of my paying job before we could even begin to start to assemble this. And then, that's the best case. That's just my comment.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, like I just recently asked the light plant to give us some data about the missing streets.
mhm.
And so now we have a dependency on someone besides ourselves that we don't really have a control over.
I think that as I was writing what's in front of us and thinking about the problem, my thinking has been that with the limited resources that we have, we have the ability to sort of chart a course forward, sort of survey the issues in a broad sense, and lay down some markers about, there's a path this way, there's a path that way, there's a path the other way. We certainly, never had and aren't going to have the resources to do an extensive cost estimation exercise around what it costs to do a lot of fiber construction. It seems to me that has to be work that's done by appropriate staff or funded in a certain way. I think we can recommend that be done. I think we can characterize what is needed there, and lay out a program, the framework or potential frameworks for a program. And that's what the memo essentially reflects. It says we can, in a current fiscal year, in a 1-year time frame, we can sort of chart that and create enough knowledge and understanding in one place to make those choices apparent. At that point, I personally feel strongly that it does become an opportunity for both the existing boards and to some extent the citizenry to make some choices about, how much investment and how does that investment get prioritized against everything else? Because as we all know, in a community, we have to choose sometimes between, firehouses and hospitals, or schools and something else, snow plows or something, whatever it may be. And I, my view is that this becomes one of those things that needs to be, so there needs to be a process that does that. I think those of us that are involved in this on a day-to-day basis have an interest, but we have to recognize that broader mandate is required at some point. Any other comments? So in terms of
My quick comment is I agree, and busy taking notes, but yes, I agree.
Yeah.
I think what you said is absolutely correct. Yeah.
in terms of the specific of the timing, though, that was one of the things that, so in some ways there's an implied ask here of particularly the 5 of us to make a commitment for a further period of time than I think we were initially asked to do. And so, if we put a date in there, it kind of goes with an understanding that if appointed or if reappointed, we will agree to serve. And so that's why I think it's certainly an open question as to how much time do we want to take. And I think at this stage of the game, we all probably do have a pretty good sense of at least one of the possible ways to approach this from a work perspective.
Yeah, I guess I could make a comment about that. The reason I'm serving on this committee is not for any other reason that I've already invested a bunch of personal time and energy thinking about this problem from the beginning. And I would like to see it to its completion and to its success, in the regards of making it broadly available, which is really the charter of this particular committee and what Gail started us with. And so as far as I'm concerned, I'm willing to invest time and energy as much as I can to keep moving that forward, whatever it takes.
David, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm willing to go forward. I'm a little more neutral than Scott is, but I'm willing to move forward and continue.
Mhm.
I'm not in the corner that is yet convinced that it should roll out to all. Let me rephrase that. I'm in the corner that says it should roll out to all the town, but that the way to finance it is through increased participation of the 75% that's not served. So it should be almost self-financing. That, at least that's the way I'm currently thinking about it.
Yeah. I believe that the way I represented our work in the memo reflects this, is that once there's a reasonable quantification done of the scope of the remaining construction, then there are probably multiple ways to fund that, and a prioritization exercise of how much priority that gets compared to everything else. I believe that's where we have to go back and say, and maybe propose a process for reaching a decision about that as a town. But I do not think that it's necessarily up to us to, I mean, we may have a recommendation in that area, but we also, I think, could just say, here's A, B, and C options, and they accomplish this goal in a short time frame, in a medium time frame, or in a long time frame.
I agree.
And I think that clarifying that and making it possible for the boards to choose, or for the community to choose, is a service to the community. Gordon, your thoughts?
I'm willing to extend my service out till this particular target, which is town meeting. I'm cautious about vastly expanding the financial footprint here, so I'm just cautious. But I recognize that the plan that is currently in place for rolling out or adding new subscribers is restrained in a number of ways, and that may be okay, except that I think that the work of our committee has shown that the prioritization scheme that is in place will not ever, by the ordinary course of the way that the enterprise is working, solve certain problems. I call them like negotiation log jams. And the problem with that is that then you have classes of people in town who are not served now and aren't likely to ever be. So I recognize that is kind of a shortcoming of the status quo. I wouldn't necessarily agree with the idea that we need to go out and get a bond issue and spend a whole lot of money right away. I guess if you guys want to put that out as option C or D or A or whatever among a palette of options, I guess I can't really complain about that. It would get us closer to completion. But my instincts are towards finding flaws in the processes that are in place, recommending improvements for them, and finding the resources within the broadband business to accomplish our goals.
And to be clear about what I'm thinking about when we talk about an extension, I believe that we should be working with as much energy as we possibly can to complete a report that contains recommendations in all of the areas that Article 41 outlined, and have that report published by the time annual town meeting starts. And the only reason I'm suggesting that we push the appointments to the end of the fiscal year is because that would give us the opportunity to communicate with other committees and interested parties as a task force, essentially communicating the content of the report and what we found for a month or two after town meeting has occurred. And as I'm assuming that once we set that deadline, that report might come out virtually on the eve of town meeting or something like that. And we would need some time to just go around and say what it is. So the work would be substantially done, but the communicating about what the work says and does and maybe responding to questions about the work might take a little bit more time. And that's kind of what I was thinking. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and from that point of view, we don't actually necessarily need to produce an interim set of findings or detail the progress of our thinking, except to say that, look, we were going to present this at town meeting. That's not until April. The appointment ends in February. How are we going to, it really doesn't actually require going into a lot of details to ask for that extension.
Yeah. I felt that, and this was to some extent in response to the communication that I had with Terry earlier this week about the request for the extension. I did feel like if you go to the select board and say, we've been working on this and here's where we are, but we need more time. I felt like it was a responsible thing to do to try to characterize what we know and what we don't know, and what we think we will be saying and finish.
Yeah, that's fine.
That was why it was a little bit more lengthy. Kind of a two-parter. So the first two paragraphs are, here's where we are, this is what we're asking you to do, and by the way, this is what we've learned along the way.
So that's fine. And I wasn't aware when I suggested shortening it that the longer version was something that Terry had asked us to do. So that's fine.
Yeah. Well, I thought it was, she didn't exactly ask for it. She just made a suggestion.
Okay.
Okay, great. Do we need any further discussion on that?
No.
Okay, great. So the next thing, and it's a similar but different purpose, is preparation of the, I'm going to try and make sure that I have it to bring up, the submission for the annual town report. The annual town report is a book that gets published every year by the town. And I was inclined to go more or less short and sweet with this. So
I think it's in by definition short and sweet. It's 2 pages limited. Other committees actually put their pictures of the committee members in the upper corner. I've been involved in the one that's Carlin is mostly done for us for the PEG, and
pick the wrong window. Let me just.
I think it's looked fine to me personally.
Yeah. So this is a little less specific about kind of what we.
I mean, I have a general question. We're not a standing committee, so would we normally be permitted submitting something to this? I'm happy to do it. I think it's good to do so people can see that the Article 41 actually resulted in work, and maybe it's acknowledgement of our energy and effort and Gail's initiative here. but because we're not a standing committee, I'm not sure we even need to, do we need to do this? Question mark.
I think that it makes sense.
Okay, fair enough.
Partially, so I was included obviously on the distribution from the town about this. It is a task force. I think other task forces have done this. My expectation is that because we were created in the town meeting that's reported on in this book, it makes sense to do that. At some, assuming that we do wrap up at the end of the year, I would probably create something for next year's report that just says, here's our report. Or, the report can be found on the town website, which is where I assume it would be. So this is the text that basically lists who we are. I didn't feel super in need of photos, especially given the fact that we meet on Zoom and people don't know what we look like by now.
No, that's fine. I was just
Yeah.
commenting about the nature of the other reports I've seen.
Yeah, and because it is a task force, it seemed to me to be less important to do that. So I think that just because I want to make sure that I didn't miss anything in the emails or comments that people have had. Did anybody want to propose any specific changes to the draft that was sent for review?
Might have sent a couple of very minor suggestions.
Okay.
You see, so I sent you 2 emails this evening.
Okay, let me double check that.
Okay, so my suggestion actually is about something that yeah, okay, and who is going to control the finances and basically initiate the capital planning for this? And as a representative of the light board, and thereby also a representative of the light plant, I say that the budget process originates in the enterprise. Now, that doesn't mean that enterprises get to do whatever they like. After they do a budget, it gets sent around. Maybe FinCom could take a look at it. It even goes to the town meeting and ends up usually on the consent calendar. These are all approvals. I'm not saying that those don't exist, but I'm talking about where it originates. And I think that that's philosophically important because it also says who controls this enterprise. I mean, it's really it kind of matters. If we pitched it to, say, the town manager or the select board, a capital planning for one of the enterprises, I mean, that's okay. That does happen all the time. It would be just a little bit outside. It needs to end up back into that track, no matter where it originates from.
So Gordon, you made an interesting comment here. What you just suggested that the vehicle and what I wrote down was it goes from the enterprise to the FinCom and then is approved as part of the consent agenda for the town meeting. That was the path you just described for this. Which, the way I heard it, doesn't put it through the town manager. It's not necessarily in the path. The town manager is not really generating this, but it's more that path you described.
Well, he is the town manager. She is actually the general manager of the light plant. So yeah, it goes through them too. But I'm just saying that the flow, the direction of the flow goes from the light plant,
yeah,
and its management, and then out to the town. It doesn't really originate in the town and then get pushed down onto the light plant. And that could,
I think that makes perfect sense. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, that would be the place for it to originate, which is the entity that's running the broadband, whether it's part of the light plant or not, that's a separate subject. But right now, as I understand it, the broadband business is a sub entity of the light plant.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think
Basically, I can figure out that's the way it runs.
in terms of wording, what I think what you're reacting to is this sentence that ends this third paragraph of the report. And so the task force, we define these 4 focus areas. So that the fiber network reaches 93% of parcels, but only 80% of residential and business units. The goal is to understand the scale and scope of the unserved areas. Once defined and categorized, logical completion plans may be developed, constructing a full, you can see there's a typo there. Town-wide fiber optic network is a significant investment that would take multiple years. As such, considerations of how to incorporate this work into the town's capital planning process will be addressed in the report. And I guess when I wrote that, I was thinking the town's capital planning process is a general broad thing that incorporates, the town as a complete entity, which includes obviously the light plan, and the schools develop their own capital plan too. But I still might have said, incorporating capital planning for buying new schools ends up being a townwide piece. But I also understand the point that it is in fact CMLP. That's where the resources ultimately come from.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, they could come from there if we continue to use the self-funded model.
Yeah.
Then there wouldn't really be any call on town capital, right? There wouldn't be any borrowing or whatever. But if there is, then that decision, I think, starts at the enterprise. The enterprise works on this and then goes to the capital markets. Well, it doesn't go directly to the capital markets. It goes to the town first.
Well, wait a minute. I mean, I think our charge is to make these recommendations to the select board. The Article 41 says select board. Select board could then ask the light plant to make those decisions. Whoever, this part is very vague to me, which is, let's say that we did make a recommendation that included some sort of additional loan lending to accelerate connectivity to other people. Then the question becomes, how do you, if you have to fund that, that's a decision that's part of our recommendation. We're not going to do nothing more than a recommendation. The question is, who makes that decision? Is it the select board? Is it the light plant?
It's the light plant.
Well, except for our charge says we're reporting to the select board. That's my that's my question.
We are.
Yeah,
but
the charge doesn't change the fact that, right, this is, I mean, put it another way, like, the select board can't go to the light plant and ask them to change their rates. Doesn't work that way. I mean, there's some structures in place. Look, we don't have to, I'm not, take my word for it or not. And we don't even have to discuss it. That's the way that the system's set up. And adjusting the language is just a little bit more, in line with how the system works. And honestly, we could probably even leave those words there as long as we understand that this is in the context of an organizational and financial structure that's already in place.
There's certainly going to be room in the report to be, much more precise about what process we think is appropriate. I think Terry would like to say something.
Thank you. This is a very interesting discussion, and for the last 15 minutes, I've been debating whether to raise my hand because it's better for you guys to be discussing this. Point out that there is one other monkey wrench in this, which is ARPA and the infrastructure bill. And it's actually a good monkey wrench because a lot of money is coming in. We do not have a plan right now on how we're going to spend this money. $5.6 million is coming into the town from ARPA, and half of it is in the bank already. Then the infrastructure bill is coming in, and then we can apply for more. So you folks might want to weigh in about the priority of broadband versus all the other priorities that are going to be competing for this money. And I just want to mention that on January 31st, we're having a forum at the select board where all committees can come in and all citizens and weigh in. So I know this even really complicates your discussion. But I didn't want to fail to mention that.
Mm.
What,
Thank
Terry,
you.
what else could that money get spent on?
Right, that's going to be the first part of the meeting. It's going to be
Okay,
a presentation on all the things that are eligible. For example, in the infrastructure bill, I think that other enterprise funds are eligible, like water mains, water treatment,
Mhm.
roads, which is in the general fund. Anything where we've had lost revenue is eligible. It's pretty complicated. There's a lot going on with it.
Mhm.
So I guess there's sort of two different things going on. One is, should the fiber be paid for from the users of it, or should the town contribute? And then the third sort of source is these grants that are coming in.
Yeah.
So I know it makes it much more complicated for you guys, but I really didn't want to exclude you from that discussion.
wow.
Because fiber is a very big need, and we could definitely, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity that we're going to be receiving all this money.
Mhm.
Barry, one comment that I would make was, one of the premises I think we've been making was separating the notion of who pays for it versus where the funding comes from before it
Right.
gets paid back. So of course, all the models that we've developed around the broadband were designed to pay the loan back over time from the operational profits of the entity. As we, one of the things I noticed that I've started to dig into in the last 2 weeks is the financials, which are all available on the public web for going back to way before the fiber started. But the basic, one of the things I've realized that I hadn't been thinking a lot about was the fact that the capital value of the broadband business has increased because every time we do an install, the labor cost of doing the install plus the equipment like the ONT becomes capital value, which we own. And it goes on to I would guess either a 20 or a 30-year depreciation schedule. So we've been building up value in that context. It's not money in the bank. We can't write a check against it, but there is some rather substantial value in that regard as well. And so the question is whether we, again, I think the best way for us to proceed is to first, what is the depth of the problem? What would it cost to solve it? And then offer up solutions third and separately about ways we can solve it, which would be the growth wheel that Gordon and I have been talking about, or funds that come from such things as what you just described, or other schemes that we might propose, but separately. But I do think it's important to carefully segregate those three elements, which is first, what does it cost to solve the problem? Go after Gail's problem statement that she gave us, which I think is great. And then the second part is, what does that cost to solve that? And then the third part is, here's some alternatives to funding it. And fundamentally, I believe that's beyond the scope of this committee. We might have a personal bias that we like the growth wheel model, but this may be something that goes to the select board or the light board or the town meeting. And I don't actually, frankly, I don't even know who would make that decision now, but would, let's say we want to accelerate this. Do we want to approve another $3, $4, $5 million to accelerate this? Or do we want to just do the growth model where we keep funding it and growing it? So that's a part that I don't think it's an encompass of this board, this task force to actually reach that conclusion, but rather
Right.
to lay out those alternatives and say, these are the alternatives.
Right, I agree 100% with everything you said, but I
Right.
just want to fail to mention this, even though it's not exactly in your charge. But just so you know, it's out there and you might want to participate on the 31st.
Okay, we would certainly. Gordon?
Yeah, in a way, I'd kind of like to change my answer. That little speech I gave a moment ago, can I have a do-over on that?
Sure.
It's like, gosh, new money.
We can
That
all
completely
resolve.
changes the picture.
Yeah.
And here's the thing is I have in my mind basically stable situation, right? This is not stable. This is a meteor out of space, right? And so it's not necessary. It is actually not within the light plant management and board to make a decision like what Terry is talking about. And so now we're talking about town. So I really actually I kind of do think that this is a different scenario. The
This
other
is a
thing is
town meeting decision.
Yeah,
Right.
I would
Yeah,
agree with
sure.
that. Yeah, it
Yeah,
seems
'cause
like a
it's-
town meeting level thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think
Um,
as such, it's helpful if a group like this one, because it is citizens, is in a position of advocating. I would expect that all of the enterprises, I would expect the water department constituencies and the roads people and everybody else to also line up with
Yep.
their priorities. And frankly, I would be disappointed if broadband staff or CMLP staff wasn't also already thinking about how to spend money that might come their way that way. But it's better to have two people trying to work on the same thing than to find out that nobody did. Yes, Gordon.
it's kind of like what is it? Pigs at a trough.
Mhm.
It's like and actually having some competition should push the less strong ideas aside and actually optimize the outcome for the town as a whole. I just wanted to suggest that, and this is kind of riffing off of what Scott was saying, that there's an opportunity here by investing in the broadband business to actually basically create a return for the town, which is a little bit, I think in a way, to me, seems more of a groundbreaker than just paving a few more streets. I mean, those streets will have to get paved, and that's an expense that maybe could be reimbursed by this money. But if we invest this, we're back to the virtuous circle. It'll pay a dividend, and then that dividend can be used to continue to improve life for all Concordians.
It is interesting that, if you frame things in terms of where things stood at the beginning of the pandemic and when this, some of the infrastructure legislation was being put out in the first place, just getting broadband added to bridges and roads and whatever else, was always traditional broadband, seemed like there was a debate for about 5 minutes over that. And now here we are a year or so later. And I think it's pretty unquestioned that it does in fact belong up there. This meeting wouldn't be happening without those capabilities, and I think that's very important. And so it's explicitly named, and so I think it would make sense for us to do that. I also would remind us, and it's not something that made it into either of my reports, but certainly we've had citizens come to us and say, where's the equivalent of broadband essentials for Concord Light? What are we doing for those community members who really have an affordability problem, and why isn't that there? And so that's another aspect of the way something like grant funding or special funding could be done, because there's not necessarily a strict economic return on each and everything.
I have just an interesting, not tangential thought, but one of the things that as we were talking about this, and Mark, you were describing the phenomena of how broadband's importance may have changed with COVID. A perfect example is my personal situation. My wife and I both work from home. We are on the phone. I work with folks from Germany, United States. So my days are quite long, 7 a.m. till, whenever we finish tonight. And it's all, plus my wife, and it's all dependent on the broadband. And because of that, we can afford to pay our property taxes, utilities, blah, 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 all the other things that we're not just the broadband, but all the other things that if we couldn't do that, we couldn't live here. We'd have to move out,
Mhm. Not to mention the fossil fuel, it's not getting burned because you're not.
Oh, yeah.
Else to
Yeah.
do
Well,
this.
I did take the commuter train, so I was at least doing that, but
Really?
Even,
I
even
used
that
to do
burns
that too.
fossil fuel.
I know that, but it's
Um,
a slightly better, just slightly.
Yeah.
better.
One point I wanted to make, sort of back on the original question of the capital process, and the reason I had worded it the way I did is because I do have a great deal of regard for the what was it called, the capital planning task force work that was just completed this past fall, and it represents something of a new effort to integrate the capital planning across the community completely, and defines these tiers of investments that have to do with how much is the investment and over what time frame. And it's suggestive that this, because we've seen over the years that certain kinds of projects sometimes do seem to, displace other projects, and some projects almost never kind of rise to the top because of that, because of the natural constituencies and so forth. And so my feeling is that I'm particularly supportive of that process. It puts the finance committee at the center of it, as I understand it. And my feeling is that the sort of positioning our recommendations to integrate into that process, which is being used across multiple entities. And there's been aspirational statements, I think, about getting the enterprises to participate. Makes sense to me. Now, others may have a different view, but I would like to see us land there. Okay, Terry, did you have more of the, no?
Just very quickly, this money sounds like a huge amount of money, and it is a once in a lifetime. But on the other hand, Sudbury had this type of forum, and they are also getting 5.6 million, and they got 29 million worth of requests. So it's not, even though it's a lot of money, it's not going to solve everything. We still need to do a lot of prioritizing and planning.
Yeah, I mean, in just as terms of orders of magnitude, to Scott's earlier point, the initial investment in fiber by the light plant, which was a bonding authorization from town meeting to be repaid by CMLP funds, was on the order, it was either 4.1 or 4.3 million dollars, which led to the basic construction. But since then, the additions to the network that have been made in order to provide service to people have weighed in at about another $2 million in capital. So adding those little endpoints does in fact add up over time. And if one really, really wanted to, you could certainly spend all of that money on fiber. I'm not suggesting that anybody should do that or that it would be appropriate. But figuring out what's an appropriate investment to make with respect to other priorities, as well as what's going to return benefits, both on the sustainability and the economic activity perspective. Now, I would argue that it's the enterprise that returns the most to the town economically and financially, but that doesn't mean we can go without water.
Yeah. By the way, just to clarify, Mark, I happen to know those numbers. 4.5 million was authorized, and they actually came in under budget at 4.0 million for the smart grid.
Yeah.
And then, as you mentioned, the capital value, I think the number you said was about right, which is this is the cost of all the installations of the fiber to the home, the installations, capitalized labor, and the ONT's 1.9 million of capital, which is now on a depreciation schedule.
Okay.
Which is amazing. When you think about that, half of this is, half of what the original infrastructure for the fiber has already been added to on top of, with all the direct connections to the homes.
And there's two reasons for that. One is it's a lot of little projects that you don't get quite the same efficiency on. So that's one, and it's not done all at once. So it's been invested slowly over time. Okay, so I'm going to take that as consensus that from the perspective of the annual report, we've reviewed it. I heard the comment about the town's capital planning process. Does anybody feel strongly that that wording should be changed, or given all that discussion, it's okay as it stands for, for the purpose that it'll get more fleshed
Well,
out?
how about if we said town and enterprise?
Okay. Town's enterprise capital planning process?
Or yeah,
Okay.
have both words in there, because it's a combination of effects.
Okay, I'll
Or
do
a
that.
combination of considerations, because
Okay.
the enterprise planning isn't going to handle Terry's challenge, and even if we got $1 million, it's the town meeting isn't going to tell us how to spend it.
Okay. That's fine. And that's was due to the public information officer tomorrow. So with your agreement, I will plan to forward that on, unless somebody's dying to have their picture taken.
We've taken a
good.
screenshot of our heads here.
Well, that's actually what we did for Peg, by the way. It's not necessary.
We're not doing that.
Carlin orchestrated that. I think she's on this call.
She was here.
Yeah. But no, we don't need to do it.
We should take a picture of Gail eating yogurt during the meeting.
No,
Be appropriate. Be perfect. You're making me
Yeah, I'd have
hungry.
to put my spoon down. My son brought me some Jello with whipped cream
Look-
on it.
Oh, sweet.
Oh, man.
It looks delicious.
That brings back memories.
Sounds like comfort food.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, those were the things that frankly chewed up my week. So I think last week, if memory serves, and it isn't very well at these days, we were talking about the outline of the report. We were talking about areas of recommendations, and I think I put out the call for any additional suggestions or points that anybody might want to make on that. So I guess I'll just open the floor up to members of the board of the task force to make any further comments that you might want to make on that on content. And if not, then I think we should maybe talk about what we're going to do in terms of process, given that we've got sort of 2 weeks till we next gather. All right.
Just a really minor point that Mark, I mentioned to you when we spoke. I think in the first page or executive summary or somewhere right in the beginning, we need to have a definition of fiber.
Okay.
Just so people know what the heck we're talking about. And so to get that, I kind of just went online and went to like the Fiber Broadband Association and looked at their stuff. But does anyone have any, thoughts about what to emphasize on that, or maybe some technical references? Of course, it seems really straightforward, but I came up with 3 paragraphs.
Okay. Let's
Well, maybe one thing
I actually
go ahead.
go ahead, Scott.
What I was going to say is one thing that we could clarify, and this is kind of based on our friends at Concord Green, which is people to understand the difference between the fiber being a pipe with bits as opposed to content or email or other things. I mean, that at a very high level, I think that may be something that may be useful to do to make sure people are clear on. That's
okay. So it's a pipeline or a way of transmitting something, and it's not any particular content.
exactly.
And your definitional a question here brings me close to just kind of an objection I had to the charge.
Hmm.
Right? Like they didn't, I really don't believe that the select board was trying to dictate what technological specifics are used in order to get service to everybody in town. And if it did involve using wireless technology at some point in that technology stack, I'm sure that the select board didn't have an opinion on that. And yet, in spite of that not being in the charge, not being in the warrant, it got written into the charge. And now it's being written again in terms of a definition. So anyway,
Yeah, we've talked about this before, and the fact that
here's the thing is it undermines some of the strength of our recommendations.
I think we concluded, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we concluded that we could recommend whatever, whether it was wireless or not. We know that, I mean, I think Gail had pretty much indicated that from her perspective, who was the author of the charge, that she was not thinking wireless. But that doesn't mean, you know, one of the other things I've noticed in the last couple of weeks, and please don't ask me to find the link, but I'll try and find it. They're talking about over-the-air charging of things now. And if you're worried about RF exposure and its effects on humans, over-the-air charging is at the top of my list because there's a lot of power involved in that. And, you know, the other thing that's kind of related to that is Comcast creates floating hotspots off of all of their Comcast customers. So I don't know if you've ever noticed this on a cell phone, if you walk just pretty much anywhere, if you look at the available Wi-Fi networks, you'll see that there's a Comcast network available. That's because what they do is they've created a mesh out of all their customers, and that's out there. And, you know, that's so purely from a technical viewpoint, you know, I think we've discussed this before. We said we're going to focus on fiber connectivity. Mark made some really great arguments about how much more robust fiber is, and that we would head in that direction. And I feel like that our charge should be narrowly focused on that. We can make some anecdotal recommendations about, gee, you might consider wireless, but let's stay focused on that. That's my.
Well, here's the thing is that I think the biggest barrier to extending service to everybody in town is at places like Concord Green.
Mm-hmm. So
and that's because of the cost of laying conduit to all of those, to every resident, regardless of whether or not they want our service. Totally different case than on my neighborhood, where a couple of people picked it up and a couple of people put in conduit. You wouldn't have that problem if it were wireless. Okay,
Well,
and whether or not wireless is dangerous or you can charge your charger off of it or something like that is completely irrelevant to the financial picture that we're trying to draw here, which and I've come up with some creative ideas. Maybe they'll probably get shot down, about how we resolve that logjam. But I think that there are technical aspects to tackling that. And when we say right off the bat that you can't consider anything other than something that's already been chosen, then the likelihood of success is a lot lower. I'm not saying that I know what the better solution is, but I really don't feel comfortable with saying that whatever solutions there are, you need to eliminate any of the ones that involve using wireless.
Okay.
Well, the reason that I know we talked about this before, but the article was proposed because fiber is a future-proof technology that it would benefit every single human being in this town if they could have a wire to their home or business or school or institution. That's what this article was about. So, and I feel really strongly that that is the best way to go. So anyway, we've talked about this. So.
Well, and I don't. And your view was not.
So wait, Gordon, this is something we've already discussed some time ago.
You've already waited to
diving down into these definitional issues now.
Just a minute. I thought I saw David getting ready to do it, and on this particular discussion, I'm going to make sure that everybody gets equal time, including myself. So go ahead, David.
So I recall this conversation in the very beginning, that the easiest solution to Concord Green would be wireless. And I do recall us kind of crossing that off the list, if you will. I have a question for Gail, just from a conceptual standpoint. When you wrote the article, you thought only that fiber would be that solution. Would that be fair to say?
Well, there are other providers that offer wireless. So why does the town need to get into it? You know, if you want,
Okay.
so,
But as you get to, hold on for a second, I got a spam call, 1 second, please. So as you get to the complicated solutions like Concord Green, where the financial hurdle is significant, whether it's borne by us or borne by the town, would you look at wireless as a potential compromise?
um,
And I'm not,
yeah,
Gail, I'm
yeah,
not
I mean, I think that's up to the landlord or the homeowner. If they want to do it that way, you know, if a building wants to just have the fiber, you know, comes into the, I think it's the ONT, and then they put up a router and everyone goes off the router, but that's missing out. They're missing
Okay.
out on the benefits of the fiber. So I think just that, you know, you get your electricity, everyone has electricity, no one complains about how electricity comes in. I think fiber should be offered in the same manner. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. So
Yeah,
if
because, I mean,
people want to use wireless and their private property, there's nothing, you know, that I can do about it, but I'd like everyone to have access to fiber.
right. And so I think we had the discussion that wireless within our private property is not perceived to be potentially as if 5G is harmful, not as potentially as harmful as that 5G may be. If we put a tower up here at Concord Green, everybody could get 5G wireless. It would solve the problem that right now we have, at least the one that we perceive. So what you're saying, Gail, and I'm not, again, this is not putting in the spot that from your perspective, the warrant doesn't entertain a 5G solution.
No, absolutely not. I mean, it's a safer, better, future-proof technology that gives everyone the best access to telecommunications. So,
And to be clear, it's the warrant does not forbid it, but the charge does. And the
Right.
reason
well, the
was is
warrant
that
just
you
says
inserted it in
fiber.
Charge.
The warrant says fiber. The warrant doesn't talk about wireless.
The warrant does not forbid this conversation. In fact, this conversation that I'm having was forbidden by the select board.
I think in this case, and I'd have to go back and reread for this point, but I think Gordon is right. The select board, when they gave us a charge, was a bit more restrictive than what the warrant article actually suggested we could delve into. And I think they thought they were doing us a favor by saying you don't have much time, so just look at this. I'd like to propose this sort of way of thinking about it. I believe that our primary charge mission is to analyze the fiber construction and completion of a fiber network, and to illuminate that, the issues according to that. And if we think about it as a sort of, I guess you could almost think diminishing returns, there was some that was relatively easy and inexpensive, and to get to that very last premise, wherever it is in town, is probably orders of magnitude more expensive than the easiest. And so, if we recognize that at some point it may become uneconomic to put fiber absolutely everywhere, that it can be, just because it can be done doesn't mean it should be done. But I think that our responsibility is to analyze it as best we can and say, this is what that would look like should we do it. Now, the other piece that was in the article around barriers to subscription growth, and we've discussed this quite a bit, is when we get into various situations where there's kind of an intermediary, a landlord, a homeowners association that doesn't want to make an investment or some other situation, it may become impractical to do that. And so this question about, are there alternatives that could deliver an internet service or a broadband service other than fiber that might allow somebody to get over whatever barrier that is, whether it's an economic barrier or a political barrier or something else. I think that it becomes possible to at least allude to those and introduce those possibilities when we're talking about that aspect of it in the report. How does that strike all of you as a way to kind of deal with both?
That's where I'm heading with this. I don't feel like I feel like as if rewriting the charge the way it was putting a thumb on the scale, saying you can do whatever you want. You can choose every technology out there that's fiber, as long as it doesn't involve wireless. Okay. And yet I believe that this the condo logjam is one that invites a potential wireless solution. I'm not saying that is the solution. Hey, that's not my job. The staff knows what they're doing. They've got the technical training. Let's not put the thumb on their scale either. We just not rule it out. Okay. And so what you just said, Scott, but Mark, I mean, is I think a reasonable compromise. It's like that we're not, for one thing, implying that we did think about wireless and excluded it for good reasons. We're just told not to spend a lot of time on it. And as long as we say that that's something that could be considered going forward, and that could potentially be a cost-effective solution towards certain problems, then I'm okay. Then we haven't like shut ourselves off from a potentially valid solution to providing service. A little different than providing fiber.
Yeah, so I guess I have a slightly different view, Gordon, and I'd like to mention this, which is, unless we go through the exercise of presuming only fiber, which is the charge, we won't know what's left. So we haven't done that yet. We haven't gone through the exercise. I'll go back to the 3 steps. Where are there unserved places? How much would it cost to serve them? The third part is might we pay for them? But until we do those, at least those first 2 steps, starting the discussion about alternative technologies such as wireless, it really isn't appropriate as far as I can see. Our charge and our focus is to think about this from how can we connect every household in Concord to the fiber network. If at the end of the day we decide there's some locations that will cost $1 million to connect to because they're way back in the corner somewhere, and then we can say, well, here's some alternative technologies you might consider: 5G, microwave, stringing a coax cable. There's a bunch of other things that live in that domain, and I don't think that's really, if we stay focused on the fiber, that allows us to sort of at least meet both the wording and the intent of this article, which is to say, what would it take to connect everyone to the fiber? Then the follow-on outside of our scope is, and we can make additional recommendations. I propose that part of our outline have additional recommendations. Please to consider microwave, consider line of sight, infrared. There's a whole bunch of different technologies that might be useful there, but I don't think we should focus on those. So I think we should focus on the base problem. That's my.
You're a technical guy, Scott. I'm a technical guy. So is Mark. And I'm sure others have technical abilities too. It's very tempting when we have those skills to take a conversation like that, to take it like this down into the technical details. But that's not what they asked us to do, right? And it's a technical choice when you say that you can't use broadband. You're like you're have more. You're not qualified to make that decision.
So,
if I can
David,
just give you, I know we talk a lot about Concord Green, and this is why I think it's problematic for what conclusions we bring to the report. As you all know, we're paving. And so in 90 to 100 days, we begin our paving project. And so once we rip up those roads and then lay down the new pavement, we're not going to permit anybody to rip those roads up again for 15 to 20 years to lay conduit, which would bring us fiber. At least I don't think we're going to. That would be my personal opinion. So effectively, I think we've locked out fiber optic for a certain period of time. So we would be pursuing a different solution to get us something other than fiber optic, I think. One of those solutions, by the way, I hate to say it, but we already have it, and that's Comcast. It's not the same thing. It's, we can talk about the differences, but in a community like ours, it appears to be in another 4 months, we're locked out of fiber for a very long period of time. And we certainly, as a committee, won't have a solution in that 4-month period. And so that's problematic for people like
Right.
us.
So what I was hoping we could do, and again, we're taking it to technology, which, I'm speculating here, but if we could get Concord Broadband fiber into a couple of, into the right places, not all the places, but a few key places in your development, then that could be a platform for extending the service further out. I didn't just say wireless, okay?
Right.
I just said step 1, step 2, okay? And that there's an opportunity, a window, okay? And I just don't want to, I don't want to be in the position of saying you can choose whatever solution you like as long as it doesn't involve wireless.
Right.
Like what I'm speaking for the light plant and for the broadband enterprise, and I'd like to grab that business, or at least put a toehold so that we can get that business.
Right.
I really don't care about technology.
And neither do we. I should rephrase that. I think we do care about the technology, and particularly the safety factor of the technology. And I don't know enough about 5G to make an opinion, offer up an opinion.
Yeah.
Well, it's an interesting and very challenging problem, I think, in the group environment, because I think Gail rightly keeps on raising the sort of future-proof nature of fiber optic cable. There literally is no upper limit. And anybody who follows any of the issues around wireless spectrum these days knows that the wireless spectrum is in fact quite limited. The practical availability of spectrum is getting low. I happened to notice an article just within the last couple of days that I think both AT&T and Verizon were curtailing their 5G deployments in the vicinity of various airports because they are interfering with air traffic control.
Yeah, FAA, I actually have my pilot's license. FAA has banned the use of the 5G, and they're encouraging the carriers not to deploy 5G until they work out the issues there in the aircraft. And it's,
Not to get,
for all those reasons, we can debate all the issues about whether wireless, line of sight, there are other technologies. I think it's because of the scope of our committee, again, the best way to proceed is to not try and dive into those technical solutions, but let's just see how far we can get with fiber. And then when we get stuck, and the follow-on piece is, geez, here's some technology that could help you cover that gap. And it's carrier pigeon, it's a string and tin cans, it's fiber. I mean, it's wireless, it's who knows what it is. And I don't think that's important for us to focus on here. Gordon, I understand your goal, but let's, that's my recommendation.
But to go back, go ahead, Gail.
I just wanted to follow on. I mean, the reason I brought this to town meeting and wanted to have a committee is I realized getting the fiber to the homes. It's a really tough question, but I think it's a governmental obligation. I think society has an obligation to get people the best solution that's future proof. And I think that fiber is it. And so I know it's a tough, thing to do, and especially in certain situations like Concord Green. And we've talked a lot about that. But that's why I wanted people to come together and talk about it, because it is difficult. It's easy to just slap up a tower and say, oh, you're good. Everyone can buy 5G from Comcast or Verizon or T-Mobile or whatever. But that's a corporation, multinational corporation that doesn't care about people. I wanted like a municipal owned network that offers the best solution for the people. And I believe that that is actual fiber to the home, to the business.
Okay.
I can't accept that. I can't.
Making that assumption. We're just explore fiber first. We're not making the assumption that we know better for any other technology. The charge is first explore how far we can go with fiber, then the secondary follow-on thing, which is outside of the scope of our charge, which is to look at alternative technologies. It doesn't say look at alternative technologies. Our charge, the warrant doesn't say anything about that. It's very specific about fiber. And to be honest with you, when I came into this, I actually was on your side, was saying, well, let's look at all the different technology solutions. As engineers, we love to just solve the problem as soon as we can. But in this case, I think we need to take the discipline to look at it first from purely the fiber solution. Then once we've run out of solutions for that, for example, no one's talked about the fact that we could probably go in to Concord Green next summer with a ditch witch and lay fiber to every building and go around all the paving. But that's a follow-on thing. Let's see how far we can get with just the fiber. That's the charge. That's what I think is within the scope of what we should do. Then we can talk about those all follow-on things.
Okay, well, what I envision is probably a 5G, very, very high gigahertz technology that doesn't penetrate walls. Okay, and you mount it on the outside of that first facility that does have a fiber connection to our.
So now you're into a solution. Fixed wireless has been around for 20 years. This is again a technical solution. My argument is let's stay focused on the fiber.
Well, how are we going to come up with costs? Right? You just said a second ago we're going to estimate the costs of doing this, and we've already determined.
Estimate the cost all based on fiber.
Just a second, guys. Yeah.
Okay.
So what I had outlined was this notion of we'll think about how much fiber would be needed and how it might be built and what would that cost. And as I said, I think eventually there may be some situations where that cost becomes something that is unlikely to be affordable, and at that point some other solution. But I think it is our mission to describe what the fiber only solution would look like, and also articulate where that may become impractical. And once we've done that, then it opens the door for other things. I think I wanted to make one other point. Just
offer a little, just one correction.
I haven't said very much on this.
Yeah, sure.
It's interesting that the broadband has become looked at as infrastructure, and I do very much think of a fiber optic network like a road network. And municipalities own the roads for kind of good reason, because everybody needs to use them. There's lots of economic enterprises and different kinds of services that can be run over them, but their value really is a result of kind of going everywhere. And there's high correlation between communities that have good road systems and communities that have good economic activity. And I think that when we talk about what it takes to close those gaps, and the statistics that I've included in the reports we've made are that 25% of the premises that we have in town do not have access at all. I think that's the number. And then really we're only servicing 25% of the remaining 75% that do have access. And that I think is something that begs the question of, have we gotten to the point where, that flywheel of beneficial results actually occurs. And I prefer to stay focused on that, recognizing that there are going to be some of these edge cases that are really hard to solve with this, because, let's face it, every problem, if you have a hammer, is not actually a nail.
So I was going to offer some feedback for one of the items, one of the two items we passed around today.
Okay.
And I lost where I saw it and I forgot to mention it, but it's like, the idea that we're going to try to identify the cost and the money to solve the cost.
Yeah.
And actually, I think that that's incomplete. I think that the problems that were, to a major extent, the impediment to progress here is actually not cost. Example being Concord Green. It's Concord Green. Okay, so maybe it's Concord Green is more than just a cost issue. It's a negotiation issue. It's who pays. It's governance. Okay, so and if it turned out that
Gordon, I have to disagree with you. We've already heard.
Let's let Gordon finish, and then you can.
Well, here's if what I'm saying is true, then if we win ARPA money and get these dollars, and it turns out that the dollars aren't actually what stands in the way of solving these problems, then that would be a disappointment to all of us, right? So we need to. This is the advantage. We've been working at the buckets, identifying, and we have more work to do, but what are the actual reasons why there's not service in these different places, and what do we need to do in order to solve that? That's not really denominated in dollars.
Okay, Scott.
So I would offer up the evidence we have is that if Concord Light Plant Broadband would offer to write a check to Concord Green for $200,000 to put fiber to each of their units, they would accept it. Right? That's what we've heard.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
that's
sure. And you can always
okay.
turn any problem into a dollar problem.
Well, that's exactly what you just said was not the case.
So far, it's not. Yeah, right. Well, okay. Given the fact that you turn any problem into a dollar problem,
right? That's my point.
Right.
So at the end of the day, what we need to do is assess how many dollars would it cost to put fiber to each endpoint. Yeah. In each case, we have a number for Concord Green. It's somewhere between 100 and 200 grand, right? There's your number. Yeah, 200 or whatever the number is, and that's notwithstanding. Let's say we can figure out a way to do this with a ditch witch, and we don't have to spend quite the same amount of money. But nonetheless, there's numbers for each of these scenarios. That's the first part of the problem, is to understand what is the depth of those cases, and to leverage Mark's analogy is it's like roads. Hey, I have some friends that live on south of Route 2 up in the Fairview Haven area, where their road must be wicked expensive compared to the road that comes in front of my house, or the road that comes to someone in front of the middle of Concord. So our town absorbs that variation. That's the second part of this, which is, does this thing become an entity that supports the infrastructure that says we're going to do it independent of the cost? We didn't do that when we started this thing. We did this in a way to try and pay back the loans. But now maybe we're at a point where with the maturity, the growth, the funding that comes out of it allows us to move into that mode where we're going to do it no matter what it costs within reason. Of course, we would go in with our eyes open. And then
if it were $200,000 for 50 streets, that'd be $10 million.
I was just going to agree with both of you in the sense that I think that it is in some senses a financial solution, and to some extent it's also a policy solution. So, if you imagine the case where there wasn't any service, and Comcast was coming in as the competitor, or any cable system, typically they come in and do their initial wiring at no expense to the property owner. That's sort of what they do. And that's how they end up there. And as the incumbent, it's taking a longer view in terms of the investment. So there's policy decisions that were made that Concord Light Broadband is operating in those frameworks that says, if there's digging involved, the property owner has to bear that expense rather than Concord Light Broadband. And so we've kind of made some decisions that restrict what the level of investment is or what the payback terms for those investments are. And I think it's completely fair game to suggest that if we wanted to see the fiber network completed, one way to facilitate that would be to modify those operating policies to permit the light plant to be more interested in making those investments on private property, essentially, in order to achieve that and spell out what that is. I for one am expecting that we'll include some of that in the report that we do, because I think it's necessary, because it's not just a Concord Green problem. It comes up in lots of places, including in individual homeowners. I think once it's framed as a more general way of getting to a large percentage of these unserved properties, it becomes a little bit more tenable to see how that pays back. In the same way that, paving a long way down a road to, the last house over there also, it permits the ambulance to get there and the fire truck to get there, and as well as the school bus.
We, by the way, just as an aside, we at Concord Group can make an argument that, and we don't get snow plowing, though we're taxpayers.
Yeah.
We don't get services that we pay let's say, we don't get some of the services that we pay taxes for. And let me go back to what Gordon and Scott said. As a board, and let me just speak as an individual on the board, when we make decisions about investments, part of it is, does it enhance the value of the community? Part of it is, does the community want it? And part of it is, what we'll do for us for long term in the community. We're making an investment for EV chargers, but that investment requires a 75% vote that the community has to approve before we can make that investment. Conduit and broadband does not require that vote. This is very different rules that we have to live by as a board. And so there's different issues that we face as a board that we have to face. We can't put in EV charging stations at the level that we'd like to without the community approving it with the 75% vote. So we face different issue, guys, all the times on issues that we want to do, but we need community approval for.
Okay. I'm noticing that it is 8:05. And I think, it's good for us to remind ourselves. I found the process of writing both of these communications on behalf of our board helpful to me to get focused, and we do need to focus this if we're going to make the kind of progress that we need to make and what we're committing to make to the select board. So I appreciate that. I would suggest all of us do some writing and take these positions and frame them, and we'll begin to share them at the upcoming meetings as we try and take on sections. And I think that will enable us to create this report, because I do feel it's really important to capture all of these perspectives, and I'm sure there are others that will come to us as soon as we hit any kind of public distribution on that. So with that, unless anyone has anything pressing in terms of
the reason, back to the political rather than dollar sign
Mhm.
Negotiation logjam, you know, I could translate that logjam into financial terms in that we'd have to pay $200,000 with an uptake of maybe 8%. So that's completely unlike the 2 or 3 people on my street that chose it, right? Not everybody chose it. So the ROI on there for them was a lot different than it would be to put it in a place with everybody's got to get it, but only a few people are going to pay for it. So that pushes those multi-unit to the end of the line. We're not going and not they're financially, the ROI on that kind of a project is much lower if we're going to come up with funds to do it.
Just briefly, though, it's probably not an all or nothing. You know, an investment in the conduit that would enable the buildings themselves to be connected is not the same as the investment to actually enter every single unit and enable every.
Okay, well, that helps.
So, you know, one
Just
could.
the conduits that are
Yeah, I
expensive
mean,
too,
if you
though.
think about the way David framed it earlier, he's saying they're going to dig up the streets and they're not going to dig them up again. My answer to that is put conduit under the streets, you know, at least at the places where you're going to need to cross streets. And if you do that small investment now, you won't be sorry because you'll use it eventually. And, you know, CMLP could make the investment to get a piece of fiber to each building on the outside and not enter anybody's unit until they place an order. Those would be, you know, partial measures that would take advantage of the opportunity and yet you know, control the costs somewhat. So increasing the opportunity for return.
Mark, I think you just hit the nail on the head. And that's sort of the next level of detail that we would have to get into for each case. And I do agree. I bet you dollars to donuts. I bet $10 and a cup of coffee at Starbucks that if we looked at the plan for the paving for Concord Green, we could probably figure out a number of places where we could put a conduit horizontally underneath the street, and that would make retrofitting fiber in the future much easier.
But I'll send you where the transformers are, and if you can get quote down to 3,000 feet, good luck.
Yeah, I'd love to do it. I'd be happy to do that as an aside to this, because again, this is we're using Concord Green as a proxy for a number of these problems. I mean, I think Kai's Road is another one, which is a totally different thing because it's it's coaxial there. But I'd love to. I'm happy to do that offline.
Yeah, our electrician guesstimated it at 5,000 feet of conduit.
Yeah,
running from our 9 transformers.
Yeah. Well, like I said. Well, anyway, let's. I move that we complete the meeting.
Yeah.
Subject to public comment. How's that?
Terry.
Sorry, I don't want to prolong your meeting. I think that tonight's discussion was really excellent. There's a lot of expertise here, a lot of passion here. And I again repeat that I'm not really sure you're going to finish it by May or June, but that's you guys' call. But it just seems to me there's a lot to do here. And speaking of that, during the meeting, I emailed Carrie and we can put you on the agenda for January 20th, which is a 6:30 select board meeting right before the special town meeting. If it's going to be a very simple matter that we're just going to extend your charge to a certain date, like June 30th. There's going to be more discussion. If you want to change the charge in any way or have any kind of discussion, then we're going to do it a different day, maybe the 24th of January.
Yeah. I think simply extending the appointments at this point is all we are really asking for and need, just so that we have authorization to meet next month.
Yep.
Yeah.
Great.
So Terry, you said you can put us on the agenda for January 20th to extend to June 30th. Is that what I heard? Okay, I just want to make sure my notes are correct. I would move that we do that.
Yeah, though it sounds to me, Terry, it sounds to me like that may be a meeting where you're going to have a lot on your mind. If you push it back to the meeting after that, that would still be within our deadline, right?
Right.
Yeah, so
well, the problem we're having is that meeting is getting really crowded, the 24th.
Okay. All right.
You know, I would actually maintain that we just do it then. She's offered it. Let's take
Yeah.
it. It should take
Yeah.
30 seconds.
And if we don't, if it doesn't take 30 seconds and it starts getting complicated, or we run out of time because the school special meeting is, taking precedence, then we will definitely put it on the 24th.
Yeah, my intention is to email you the correspondence that we reviewed earlier as as in the form of a formal request that you can just put in any packet that makes sense to you.
Okay, we're going to put it on the 20th, and if we don't finish, it'll be on the 24th. So,
Right.
Mark, you can be there, I guess?
Yeah, is that going to be
Yeah.
available virtually, or would I have to be there in person?
You have to be there.
Okay.
I mean, if you're not there, we could probably take it up anyway.
Yeah,
But no,
okay.
it's not going to be available virtually because they're setting up a town meeting
Yeah, I know it's at town. It's somewhere in the high school, I guess.
at the gym.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay,
right.
thank you.
Okay.
Thanks,
Thank
Terry.
All right.
Thank
you.
Joan, did you have a comment?
Thank you, Mark, very much. I don't want to keep you all. I second what Terry said. I think this is an excellent discussion this evening. I just want to let the committee know, this is a very quick personal point, that I will not be able to attend the meetings on Thursdays going forward. I'm teaching a course in public health law at BU. It meets on Thursday evenings. I just wanted you to know that if I'm not here, it's not for lack of interest. I wanted to be very clear about that. And I also, I'll continue to follow the video recordings, absolutely. And I just wanted to reiterate, again, this is my personal view coming here. There's a 2019 article in the Journal of Law, Medicine and Ethics that actually it's broadband access is a public health issue. That is the title of the article. It's excellent. And I think it really drives home the import of having the town connected, completely connected in a reliable, durable, secure network. That article was written in 2019 before the pandemic, but I think the pandemic has driven home the importance, the critical importance of having all of us connected as a community for the provision of public health services, the communication among parties, getting services in quickly. I don't think any of us realized what was going to be hitting us with this situation, the pandemic, of course, but it really has laid stark and bare, I think, the importance of having the community completely connected and having, I think there was earlier discussion perhaps of even networks within networks that would be possible if the town were completely networked on fiber broadband. So I just want to thank you all for your work. And again, a great discussion tonight. And I look forward to, reading your report. Thank
Well,
you.
thank you for your comments, and we really appreciate your participation, and I hope your course does well.
Oh, thank
I
you.
used to take the opportunity really frequently to mention that one of the things that our fiber optic network does today is carry each and every communication that the police and fire radio system actually handles. So that capability alone is something that goes on day and night, 24/7, and
Wow.
provides vital public services. It's a very basic life safety function, and it's something that network carries seamlessly and securely, and has absolutely nothing to do with browsing the internet.
Right.
And so I think that it is an important public service, and there are many services, and it is a number of different networks, even though we have this tendency to focus on the thing that we call the internet. That's only one of the things that it does for us today, and it's important to keep that in mind, and extending it to every wastewater treatment facility, every pumping station, every wastewater treatment facility is, those are things that have already occurred and will continue to occur, and are extremely important public benefits to it. And I think we should all always keep those in mind. So thanks for that comment.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, I think now a motion to adjourn is in order. Scott?
Actually, you already have one. I moved it.
Okay, you didn't get a second though. So
I'll second it.
there you go. Gordon's reliable on that. Okay, I'll take a roll call. Gordon?
Aye.
Scott?
Aye. Did you call
David?
me?
Aye.
And Gail?
Aye.
And myself, aye. Thank you very much. Support town meeting next Thursday, and we'll see you back here in 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.